The song that stopped mid-note was Fly Me to the Moon, and it was 10:47 p.m. on September 22nd, 1966. Frank Sinatra was performing at the Copa Room in the Sands Hotel, Las Vegas, when a drunk businessman in the third row decided to interrupt the most famous entertainer in the world with a comment that would change the trajectory of the entire evening. "Hey, Frank, you sound like an old man. Why don't you retire already?" The Copa Room, packed with 300 of Las Vegas' most sophisticated guests, fell into shocked silence. Frank Sinatra, 50 years old, and at the peak of his performing power, stopped singing mid-phrase and stared directly at the heckler with the kind of cold fury that had made grown men in Chicago neighborhoods cross the street to avoid him. What happened next would become legendary in Las Vegas entertainment history. Frank Sinatra abandoned his microphone, walked off the stage, and confronted the heckler face to face in front of a horrified audience that had paid premiums prices to see a show, not a street fight. The incident would last less than 5 minutes, but would be talked about for decades, as the night Frank Sinatra reminded everyone that beneath the tuxedo and sophistication lived a man from Hoboken who had never learned to walk away from a fight. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. September 22nd, 1966. Las Vegas. The setup. Frank Sinatra was in the middle of a 3-week engagement at the Copa Room, the most prestigious venue in Las Vegas. The intimate 300-seat showroom was where the biggest stars in entertainment performed for audiences of celebrities, high rollers, and industry insiders. Frank's September 1966 performances had been going exceptionally well. His voice was strong, his material was fresh, and the audiences had been enthusiastic and respectful. Frank took pride in the Copa Room shows because they represented the pinnacle of sophisticated entertainment in America. The audience on September 22nd was typical for a Copa Room show: wealthy tourists, local celebrities, casino executives, and entertainment industry figures. Everyone was dressed formally, the drinks were expensive, and the atmosphere was one of refined enjoyment. Frank had opened his set with "Come Fly With Me" and "I've Got You Under My Skin," receiving standing ovations for both songs. The audience was clearly enjoying the performance, and Frank was in good spirits, joking with the crowd and seeming relaxed and confident. But there was one problem in the audience that night. Harold Gibbons, a 45-year-old construction contractor from Detroit, who had been drinking heavily since arriving in Las Vegas 2 days earlier. Gibbons was in Vegas for a business convention, but he had spent more time at the blackjack tables and bars than in conference rooms. By the time Frank's show started, Gibbons was drunk, belligerent, and looking for trouble. He had been making comments throughout the evening, most of them ignored by other audience members who were trying to enjoy the performance. 10:45 p.m. "Fly Me to the Moon." Frank began "Fly Me to the Moon," one of his signature songs and a crowd favorite. The arrangement was sophisticated and swinging, and Frank was performing it with the confidence and style that had made him famous around the world. He was halfway through the first verse when Harold Gibbons decided to make his presence known. "Hey, Frank, you sound like an old man. Why don't you retire already and let someone younger take over?" The comment was loud enough to be heard throughout the Copa Room. Frank stopped singing immediately. The band continued for a few more notes before realizing something was wrong, and then complete silence fell over the room. Frank stared at Gibbons with an expression that everyone in the Copa Room would remember for the rest of their lives. It wasn't just anger. It was the look of a predator who had just identified his prey. "Excuse me?" Frank said into the microphone, his voice deadly calm. "Did someone say something?" Gibbons, emboldened by alcohol and apparently unaware of the danger he was in, repeated his comment. I said you sound old. Maybe it's time to hang up the microphone. Frank set his microphone down on the piano and began walking towards the edge of the stage. The audience realized that something unprecedented was about to happen. 10:46 p.m. The confrontation begins. You want to say that to my face? Frank called out as he reached the edge of the stage. Stand up. Let's have a conversation. Harold Gibbons, perhaps realizing too late that he had made a serious mistake, remained seated and tried to deflect with humor. Hey, it's just a joke, Frank. Don't take it so seriously. But Frank was already stepping down from the stage, something that no one in the Copa Room had ever seen before. Frank Sinatra was abandoning his performance to personally confront a heckler. No, Frank said, as he walked through the audience toward Gibbons' table. You wanted to share your opinion with everyone. Now let's discuss it properly. The Copa Room erupted in nervous murmurs. Some audience members were excited to witness such an unprecedented event, while others were horrified by the breakdown of the evening's sophisticated atmosphere. Gibbons' wife tried to pull her husband toward the exit, but he was too drunk and stubborn to leave gracefully. I paid good money for this show, he announced to the room. I have a right to my opinion. Frank reached Gibbons' table and stood directly in front of the seated man. At 5'7", Frank wasn't physically imposing, but his presence and reputation made him seem much larger. You have a right to your opinion, Frank said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. But you don't have a right to disrupt my show and ruin everyone else's evening. So, here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to me and to everyone in this room, and then you're going to leave quietly. 10:47 p.m. The escalation. Gibbons, whether from alcohol, stupidity, or misplaced pride, decided to escalate the confrontation rather than de-escalate it. I don't have to apologize to anyone, he said, standing up to face Frank. This is a free country, and I can say whatever I want. Frank's response was swift and decisive. He grabbed Gibbons by the shirt and pulled him face to face. Not in my show, you can't, Frank said, and not when you're ruining everyone else's night. What happened next was witnessed by 300 people, but described differently by almost every witness. Some said Frank pushed Gibbons back into his chair. Others claimed he threw a punch that connected with Gibbons' jaw. Still others insisted that Frank simply held Gibbons by the shirt while security arrived. What everyone agreed on was that Harold Gibbons ended up on the floor, Frank was standing over him, and the Copa Room was in complete chaos. Gibbons' wife was screaming. Other audience members were either cheering or expressing shock. The band members were unsure whether to keep playing or stop entirely. Casino security was rushing toward the scene from multiple directions. Frank, meanwhile, seemed to realize that the situation had gone too far. He looked around the room at the shocked faces of his audience and appeared to understand that he had crossed a line. 10:50 p.m. The resolution. Casino security reached Frank and Gibbons within seconds of the physical confrontation. They separated the two men and began trying to restore order to the Copa Room. Frank, breathing heavily and still angry, addressed the entire audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. When someone disrupts a show that you've paid to see, I take it personally. This man was ruining your evening, and I couldn't let that continue. Harold Gibbons, helped to his feet by security, guards, was escorted from the Copa Room, along with his wife. He was banned from the Sands Hotel, and later claimed that he had been assaulted by Frank Sinatra, though he never filed charges. Frank returned to the stage, straightened his tie, and picked up his microphone. The audience, still buzzing with excitement and shock, gave him a standing ovation. Now, where were we? Frank said, as if nothing had happened. I believe we were flying to the moon. Frank completed Fly Me to the Moon and continued his set for another 45 minutes, performing some of the best shows of his career. The audience, energized by the confrontation they had witnessed, was more enthusiastic than ever. September 23, December 1966. The aftermath. News of Frank's confrontation with the Heckler spread throughout Las Vegas within hours and reached national entertainment media within days. The story was reported in Variety, Billboard, and major newspapers across the country. The coverage was mixed. Some reporters praised Frank for defending his artistic integrity and refusing to tolerate disrespectful behavior. Others criticized him for resorting to violence and abandoning professional standards of behavior. The incident reinforced Frank's reputation as someone who wouldn't be intimidated or disrespected, regardless of the setting or circumstances. It also demonstrated that Frank's street-fighting instincts remained intact despite decades of sophisticated entertainment career. The Sands Hotel management was privately concerned about the incident, but recognized that it had generated enormous publicity for the hotel and for Frank's performances. Ticket sales for Frank's remaining shows increased dramatically as people hoped to witness another confrontation. Harold Gibbons returned to Detroit and became something of a local celebrity for having been confronted by Frank Sinatra. He told the story for years, though his version of events became increasingly exaggerated over time. Frank was completely out of line, Gibbons told reporters. I made one innocent comment, and he attacked me like a wild animal. That's not how a professional entertainer should behave. But most witnesses disagreed with Gibbons' characterization of his comment as innocent. Many reported that he had been disruptive throughout the evening, and that Frank had shown remarkable restraint before finally confronting him. 1967-1998. The legend grows. The Copa Room Heckler incident became one of Frank Sinatra's most famous confrontations, referenced in countless articles, biographies, and documentaries about his life and career. The story grew and changed over the years, with some versions claiming that Frank had knocked Gibbons unconscious, and others suggesting that the entire incident was staged for publicity. The truth, as usual with Frank Sinatra stories, was probably somewhere in between. Frank himself rarely discussed the incident publicly, but friends reported that he was proud of having stood up to someone who was disrupting his show and ruining other people's enjoyment. Frank couldn't stand it when someone was disrespectful to his audience, recalled Dean Martin. He took performing seriously, and he expected his audiences to do the same. If someone wanted to cause trouble, they were going to have to deal with Frank personally. The incident also became part of Las Vegas entertainment lore, demonstrating the unique intimacy and unpredictability of Copa Room performances. It showed that even the most sophisticated venues could become settings for raw human drama when the right circumstances aligned. Other entertainers who performed at the Copa Room were inspired by Frank's willingness to confront disruptive audience members. Some began incorporating audience interaction and confrontation into their own performances, though none matched Frank's combination of charm and menace. The legacy. The Copa Room Heckler confrontation remains one of the most vivid examples of Frank Sinatra's refusal to compromise his standards or tolerate disrespect. It showed that Frank's reputation for toughness wasn't just an image. It was a fundamental part of his character that could emerge at any time. The incident also highlighted the unique culture of Las Vegas entertainment in the 1960s, where the line between sophisticated performance and street-level confrontation could disappear in an instant. For audience members who witnessed the confrontation, it became a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. They had seen Frank Sinatra not as a distant entertainer, but as a real person who was willing to defend his principles regardless of the consequences. The incident demonstrated Frank's belief that live performance was a sacred exchange between entertainer and audience, one that required mutual respect and consideration. When that respect was violated, Frank was prepared to take personal action to restore it. Most importantly, the confrontation showed that Frank's loyalty extended not just to his friends and family, but to his audiences. He saw himself as responsible for their entertainment experience and was willing to risk his own reputation and safety to protect their enjoyment. Today, the Copa Room Heckler incident is remembered as a perfect example of Frank Sinatra's complexity. He was sophisticated enough to perform in the most elegant venues in the world, but tough enough to physically confront anyone who threatened the integrity of his performance. The story serves as a reminder that authenticity in entertainment sometimes requires taking risks and standing up for principles, even when it would be easier to ignore problems and continue with the show. For Frank Sinatra, the night he stopped singing to confront a heckler was just another example of his refusal to compromise his standards for anyone or anything. It was the night he reminded everyone that old Blue Eyes was still, at heart, the kid from Hoboken, who had learned to fight for everything he had. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to know that standing up for your principles sometimes requires taking risks. And that real toughness comes from protecting not just yourself, but the people who depend on you. Have you ever had to confront someone who was disrupting an important moment or ruining other people's experience? Let us know in the comments how you've learned to balance professionalism with standing up for what's right.